I'm sorry, I got stuck in that last video. I got cut off. So this is part 3, President Washington's terms in office. So whenever there is a tie in the Electoral College, like you see right here, it's going to be the House of Representatives that will decide who will be the president. So the Speaker of the House will actually decide who's going to be the president. It's the same thing here in 1824. So sometimes in our elections, we do have really close elections, and that just kind of shows you how divided we are. When you look at President Washington's, first, his first term, he had 100% of the Electoral College's vote. You just don't see that any other time. So the next thing we look at with Washington is the Whiskey Rebellion. And in the Whiskey Rebellion, this is a direct result of Alexander Hamilton's economic plan. So he has placed new taxes, he's levied new taxes on the American people. Now he's done it because he's absorbed all that state debt thanks to the American Revolution. Pennsylvania farmers are a little bit upset, and they're upset because they grow corn and they produce whiskey with it. And there's been an excise tax, an exact tax on whiskey. Now this means that as a whiskey producer, you're going to have less money at the end of the month. The more taxes you pay on an item, the less money you get to take home. So they rebel and they yell out, "No taxation without representation." Because, hey, it worked back then in the American Revolution. We complained that we didn't have representation, and then we fought a war. And so Washington hears this. He hears about this rebellion. And his Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, advises him. Washington's like, tell me what you want me to do. You kind of got me into this trouble. And Hamilton explains, we have to enforce the federal law. We have to enforce the collection of this tax. We have to enforce it or else we look weak. If the government is making laws but yet they cannot enforce them, it does not look good for you as a government. So Washington agrees. He actually goes ahead and tells the farmers in Pennsylvania, you will pay the tax, or you're going to see me firsthand. You're going to get to see the hero of the American Revolution up close and personal. And this is actually Washington in Maryland getting the militia, the local soldiers, ready to go to Pennsylvania and enforce the tax. When the farmers hear this, they're like, oh. And they decide to back down. You poke the bear, you get the bear. And Washington becomes the bear. Presidents don't lead armies in the battle. It's just not really going to happen. Now, it does happen under the fourth president, and it'll happen with James Madison, but that's because D.C. is under attack. I mean, typically you do not see presidents leading armies in the battle. They are having generals do that. But Washington says, I'll take off my little presidential cap and I'll put on my military cap, and I'll just go ahead and lead these soldiers in the battle. The farmers do back down, but Washington proves that day, you will pay the tax. You have senators, you have representatives. They voted, they approved these taxes. All revenue bills are in the House of Representatives. They decided to use this as a revenue, a way for the government to get money. And so it was approved. You had representatives. They approved these taxes. If you don't like it, next time these guys come up for re-election, vote them out. Lesson 2, federal government is supreme. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean that you can get around it. The law is just, it is fair, it is not hindering anybody's natural rights or their inalienable rights. So this is a just law. It also proves how strong the U.S. Constitution is. This was a test. The Constitution passes. It's a slam dunk victory for the U.S. Constitution, whereas Shays' Rebellion is the end of the Articles of Confederation because they can't enforce anything. The U.S. Constitution is proven strong by the Whiskey Rebellion. It actually says that the federal government can and will enforce federal law, and you will obey it. After 8 years, Washington says, peace out. So he does his farewell address. He never really verbally gives this. He writes it, and he sends it into the newspapers, and they publish it. But he steps down after 8 years. He has been elected successfully twice, and he says, enough is enough. Now, why does he do it? He shows how leadership actually works. Good leadership knows when to pass the torch to the next guy. And so other presidents pretty much follow his example. We do have a couple, people like the Roosevelts who decide not to. So Teddy Roosevelt tried for a third term in the election in 1912. That makes the election weird. And Woodrow Wilson becomes the president. You have 3 candidates vying for the presidency and no one wins a clear majority. So Woodrow Wilson gets into office. And we have his cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who actually wins 4 terms as president, 1932 and 1936. That's the Great Depression years. Then World War II happens overseas. It's starting in Europe. Hasn't got America yet, but we see the war is coming. And in 1940, he wins for an unprecedented 3rd term. Then he wins again for a 4th term. Sorry guys, naturally there's an announcement in the middle of filming. But anyway, he wins that 4th term in 1944. We haven't finished World War II yet, so he's kind of finishing it up, and then he dies. And so we do the 22nd Amendment, 2 terms only for our presidency. When Washington writes his farewell address, he basically says to the nation, here are some warnings, some issues I foresee. So he's like a prophet all of a sudden, right? He's giving us this philosophy. So first thing he says is no political parties. Now, it's a little too late because the Federalists and the Democrat Republicans are already formed. But he says, look, don't divide yourself as a nation. Just say you're Americans. We are all Americans, Nobody's listening to him, but he does make that point. He says, look, if you decide to divide up, you decide to divide the nation. And if you look back at that election of 1800, you look back at the election of 1796, he had a fair point. No entangling alliances is the second point. Please stay neutral and stay out of wars. And that goes back to his proclamation of neutrality. He says, look, if you get involved in foreign affairs, you get involved in these things, you might not win as a nation. You might be gaining enemies. You might be actually hurting the country more than helping it. So stay neutral, stay away from the big boys of Europe, and build as a nation building. That's kind of his message. So Washington casts this huge shadow, and whenever you come in after a guy like this, good luck, because the next guy, John Adams, is not going to have the greatest of times as a presidential leader. He gets 1 term, and that kind of shows you how the nation thinks about him.